You're listening to the AI Moment with me, Jonathan Wagstaff.
And me, Danny Denhardt.
And today we're going to talk about open source models. So Dan, what do we mean by that and why are they of interest?
Open source is traditional. So when you've got software, there are things that you pay for and they're premium. And then there's open source, which is generally created, coded, edited by people who are trying to make things more accessible and more open. An example of that is Firefox. Traditionally, a Firefox browser, they've had email clients. And what that is they get funding from different businesses and big organizations to help fund an alternative way to run software and operate. And what we've seen is, in a large example of open source AI or LLMs, is Meta's versions. So Llama and a number of their different tools are open source. And what that is and does is it enables anyone to use it for free, essentially. So the Chinese models, DeepSeek, Quen, etc., are ones that are well known within the industry, less known outside of it. But when you're looking to use a model and you don't want to pay for it, or you've burnt through your tokens really quickly or usage really quickly, there are open source models that are available. And one thing that I find really interesting about open source is when the costs of things seem quite cheap, but no one wants to buy their own licenses away from enterprise, I think open source is going to become a more and more attractive option for everyday user, especially ones that do a good enough or a good job versus using, Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, etc.
Yeah, I mean, we talked on a recent pod, didn't we, about situations where some organizations have found that the token budget's gone out of control. So they spent their annual token budget in 2 months, or the finance people are finding it really difficult to budget in any realistic way for token usage. And the power in some of those, I mean, as you said, DeepSeek, I think version 4 is now out and it's really quite powerful. So for a lot of the tasks that we'd ask AI to do, these models will work perfectly well, I would say.
Yeah, it's exactly that, and something that we have spoken around before, but it's worth revisiting is when you're looking to use an AI model, most people care around the output, right? So they care about getting an answer, or they care around getting something that they can use, as opposed to, or make them look good, as opposed to it having to be verified by something or by a very specific model. So that's something that many people will look to leverage. Something that Meta probably will win out in the long run is being open source and open source in their models. So over the long term, you might actually see people move across to Meta AI or using Llama LLM to get some output, get some information, get some insights from it. One question you look more on the governance side is we should probably flag there's some bias in open source, especially found in some of the Chinese models. We should flag that there are going to be biases in open source. Do we have some recommendations, or do we have some warnings we can provide smart people to be aware of?
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, I was going to ask you, what do you think the trade-off is? And I think you're right. As some of the I mean, they've all got biases, but some of the biases coming in things like DeepSeek, as you've said, around the data it admits to knowing and doesn't admit to knowing. I think the governance rules apply as they apply everywhere. We've got to be careful with this stuff. We've got to test it. We've got to experiment with it. I agree with the thrust of what you were saying earlier, which is, I think, as these AI platforms and solutions in businesses become more about, workflow design and management of our own data, then we start to care less whether it's what's the AI engine that we're using to do all this, because actually the interesting bit is the context in which you put it together. The open models offer us more flexibility in that space, but there may be some performance issues, and there's definitely governance issues, as you say, and we just got to apply the good practice that we apply elsewhere. It's a kind of horses for courses, really. It's kind of, there are some good things about this, and certainly the cost is one of them, but there'll be some governance things and some other things that we've got to just keep an eye on.
Yeah, our two Vs, the verify and validate, is going to be really important when you're you're using these open source models or models that you're not 100% confident in. And I think that's something that we haven't necessarily spoke about it enough recently, but the 2Vs are going to be so important, especially for the next few months while people are experimenting more with Claude Code, where they have their own agents, when the people are going to want to explore with OpenClaw and different alternatives out there. There's a couple of things just to bear in mind as we wrap up is once VC funding and large companies stop investing these huge amounts of money into these big LLMs or AI companies, we're going to see what happened like we saw in the food delivery and the marketplaces through VC funding. It's going to come away, and actually the prices will most likely go up, and probably the tiers are going to go up significantly, especially in and around token usage. So it'd be something to really bear in mind is the cost factor and whether it's free will be good enough or whether you actually want to go in some of the larger models. And as we said around building your own model, what a lot of startups are doing is they're moving towards open source and then editing on top of that. So they're building wrappers on top of open source models. So we might actually see your tech teams come to you or some of your suppliers come to you and basically suggest that's the way forward. So there are two ways to think around what's already happened, let history inform the future and empower you forward.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing people like Reuters and some of the analysts saying that open weight models are going to be strategically important, and I think it's for some of the reasons you've said, Dan. I think that's this is a direction of travel, I think.
So our little TLDR on open source is, well, mine are. I would definitely test them out. I'd be mindful of putting too much sensitive information as normal. I would definitely apply the 2Vs, so validate and verify the information in the output. And then compare them, like as Jonathan said more recently about comparing the different major models against each other. I'm pretty sure if you compared some of the output from the open source compared to Claude, Gemini, or ChatGPT, you'll be quite happy with the output, providing that you do check the output. So I would just be a little bit mindful if your team are going to dive straight into open source, but I wouldn't suggest being put off by it or not testing it because they are good models. Just apply the 2Vs.
Yep, I would agree completely. I think this is really about what happens when AI is getting more powerful, but it's also getting more expensive to run at scale. So if you're worried about token costs, if you want a bit more control over where your AI runs and what data it touches, then maybe open source models are for you, worth looking at. But they're also getting a lot better, and so they may be a good default for certain use cases as well. So yeah, absolutely on board. And 2Vs is a very good place to point people.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. I think I'm going to go and check out Hugging Face again this afternoon.
Good to see you, my friend, and I will see you next time.
See you next time. Thanks for listening today, everyone. If you liked what you heard, please give us a rating and review in any of the podcast players. We have a supporting newsletter, which is aimoment.co.uk, that comes out on Mondays and Fridays with every pod, and we dive a little bit deeper. So please subscribe there. Have a great week, and we'll see you soon.